Sometimes the person everyone overlooks holds all the cards. Margaret Chen had spent 30 years cleaning offices, invisible to those who mattered most. But on the day of Harrison Blackwood's will reading, she would discover that being underestimated was her greatest weapon. Margaret Chen arrived at the prestigious law offices of Whitmore and Associates 15 minutes early, just as she had done every morning for the past 30 years. Her cleaning cart squeaked softly as she pushed it through the marble lobby, past the portraits of distinguished partners who had never once acknowledged her presence. Today felt different, though. Today, she wasn't here to empty wastebaskets or polish mahogany desks. The receptionist, a young woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and a condescending smile, barely glanced up from her computer screen. "The service entrance is around back," she said dismissively, not bothering to make eye contact. Margaret stood quietly for a moment, her weathered hands clasped in front of her simple black dress. "I'm here for the reading of Harrison Blackwood's will," she said softly. This time, the receptionist looked up, her expression shifting from indifference to confusion, then to barely concealed amusement. "I'm sorry, there must be some mistake. This is a private family matter." "Margaret Chen," Margaret repeated patiently. "I received a letter from Mr. Whitmore requesting my presence." The receptionist's laugh was sharp and unpleasant. "Look, lady, I don't know what kind of scam you're trying to pull, but Mr. Blackwood's will reading is for family and business associates only. Security can escort you out if necessary." Before Margaret could respond, a group of expensively dressed people swept through the glass doors. Victoria Blackwood led the procession, her designer heels clicking authoritatively across the marble floor. Behind her came her two adult children, James and Clarissa, followed by several men in $1,000 suits who Margaret recognized as board members from Blackwood Industries. Victoria's eyes swept over Margaret with the same dismissive glance she might give to a piece of furniture. "Why is the cleaning woman still here?" she asked the receptionist. "Surely the offices are clean enough for today's proceedings." "She claims she's here for the will reading," the receptionist replied, her voice dripping with shared amusement. Victoria's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose in mock surprise. "How amusing. I suppose working in these offices for so long has given her delusions of importance." She turned to Margaret with a cold smile. "My dear woman, whatever relationship you imagined you had with my late husband, I assure you it was entirely one-sided. Harrison was a generous man, but not foolish enough to include the help in his will." Margaret felt the familiar burn of humiliation rise in her chest, but she kept her expression neutral. She had learned long ago that showing emotion only gave people like Victoria more ammunition. James Blackwood stepped forward, his face flushed with indignation. "This is ridiculous. We shouldn't have to endure this circus. Can't someone remove her?" Now, Victoria said with false sweetness. "Let's not be hasty. Perhaps we should let her stay and witness how real wealth is distributed. It might be educational for someone of her station." The group erupted in laughter, and Margaret felt each chuckle like a physical blow. She had endured 3 decades of such treatment, watching from the shadows as these people lived lives of unimaginable privilege, while she scraped together enough money to support her aging mother and put her daughter through community college. Mr. Whitmore appeared in the lobby, a distinguished man in his 70s with silver hair and kind eyes. His face grew stern as he took in the scene before him. "What's going on here?" "We were just explaining to the cleaning lady that she doesn't belong in a will reading," Victoria said smoothly. Mr. Whitmore's expression darkened. "Mrs. Chen is here at my specific request as per the instructions in Mr. Kosk. Blackwood's will. She is a named beneficiary." The laughter died abruptly. Victoria's face went pale, then flushed red with anger. "That's impossible. Harrison never mentioned any such thing. And footnote, the matter," Whitmore replied coolly, "she has every right to be here. Perhaps we should proceed to the conference room." As they walked down the hallway, Margaret could hear the whispered conversations behind her. The words charity, case, pity, inheritance, and embarrassing floated through the air. She had heard it all before, but it still stung. The conference room was elegant and intimidating, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city and a table that could easily seat 20 people. Margaret took a seat at the far end, while the Blackwood family clustered together at the other end like a defensive formation. Mr. Whitmore opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick document sealed with red wax. The room fell silent as he broke the seal and began to read. I, Harrison Blackwood, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. His voice was clear and professional as he read through the formal language and preliminary statements. Margaret's mind drifted as she listened to the legal terminology. She thought about all the late nights she had spent in Harrison Blackwood's office, emptying his wastebasket and dusting his desk while he worked. He had been different from the others. He always acknowledged her presence with a nod or a quiet thank you. Sometimes, when he worked particularly late, he would ask about her day or inquire about her daughter's studies. She remembered the evening about 5 years ago when she had found him slumped over his desk, clutching his chest in pain. While others might have called for help and stepped back, Margaret had stayed with him, holding his hand and speaking softly until the paramedics arrived. He had suffered a mild heart attack that night, and the doctors said her quick thinking had likely saved his life. In the weeks that followed as he recovered, Harrison had begun to really talk to her. Not just polite pleasantries, but genuine conversations about life, family, and dreams. He learned that she had immigrated from Taiwan 30 years earlier, with nothing but hope and determination. He discovered that she had worked multiple jobs to support her family, that she had sacrificed her own education to ensure her daughter could attend college. Most importantly, he learned that despite decades of being treated as invisible, Margaret had observed everything. She understood the business better than most executives, having overheard countless meetings and read discarded documents. Her insights, offered quietly during their late-night conversations, had proven surprisingly valuable. Mr. Whitmore's voice brought her back to the present. To my beloved wife, Victoria, I leave the sum of $5 million and the house in the Hamptons. Victoria nodded approvingly, though Margaret could see the slight disappointment in her eyes. $5 million was substantial, but it was far less than Victoria had expected. To my son James, I leave the sum of $3 million and my collection of vintage automobiles. James smiled smugly, apparently satisfied with his inheritance. To my daughter Clarissa, I leave the sum of $3 million and my art collection. Clarissa beamed, already mentally calculating the value of the paintings and sculptures. The board members received various bequests, stock options, bonuses, and token amounts that reflected their years of service. Each inheritance was substantial by normal standards, but Margaret could sense the underlying tension in the room. Where was the bulk of the Blackwood fortune? The company alone was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Mr. Whitmore cleared his throat and continued reading. The remainder of my estate, including all shares in Blackwood Industries, all remaining financial assets, and all properties not specifically mentioned above, I leave to Margaret Chen. The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. She stared at Mr. Belkos, Whitmore, certain she had misheard. Victoria was the first to break the silence, her voice rising to a near shriek. That's impossible. There must be some mistake. I assure you there is no mistake, Mr. Fisek. Whitmore replied calmly. I have a video recording of Mr. Blackwood dictating these exact instructions, along with his detailed explanation of his reasoning. James jumped to his feet, his face purple with rage. This is fraud. That woman manipulated a sick old man. She's a gold digger, Clarissa added, her voice shaking with fury. She took advantage of Father when he was vulnerable. Margaret sat in stunned silence as chaos erupted around her. The board members were shouting about legal challenges and corporate governance. Victoria was demanding to see the video recording. The room had descended into a cacophony of anger, disbelief, and accusations. Through it all, Margaret remained motionless, her mind struggling to process what she had just heard. She thought about her small apartment, where she had raised her daughter alone. She thought about the nights she had fallen asleep exhausted, her hands raw from cleaning chemicals. She thought about all the times she had been invisible, dismissed, humiliated. Mr. Obaby Whitmore was explaining something about Harrison's mental competency evaluations and the legal safeguards that had been put in place. He mentioned that Harrison had anticipated challenges to the will and had prepared accordingly, but Margaret barely heard the words. She was remembering the last conversation she had with Harrison just 2 weeks before his death. He had been working late again, and she had been cleaning his office. "Margaret," he had said suddenly, looking up from his papers, "do you ever wonder what would happen if the people who really understood this business were the ones running it?" She had paused in her dusting, unsure how to respond. "I think everyone has something valuable to contribute." "Mr. Blackwood," he had smiled at that. "You see things others miss, don't you? You understand people. Understand what motivates them. You've been watching this company for 30 years. Watching the mistakes we make, the opportunities we miss. I'm just the cleaning lady, Mr. Blackwood." "No," he had said firmly. "You're so much more than that. You just haven't had the chance to show it yet." Now, as she sat in the conference room watching the Blackwood family's world crumble around them, Margaret began to understand what Harrison had seen in her. He hadn't left her his fortune out of pity or charity. He had seen her true potential, the strength and wisdom she had developed through years of adversity. Victoria's voice cut through her thoughts like a knife. "We'll contest this will. We'll prove she manipulated him, seduced him, whatever it takes." Margaret finally spoke, her voice quiet but clear. "I never asked for this." The room fell silent again, all eyes turning to her. "I never asked for anything from your husband except fair treatment," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "He gave me something no one else ever had: respect. He saw me as a person worth talking to, worth listening to. If he chose to leave me his business, it wasn't because I manipulated him. It was because he trusted me to do what you never could." "And what's that supposed to mean?" Victoria snarled. Margaret stood slowly, her dignity intact despite everything they had thrown at her. "It means he trusted me to put the company and its employees first instead of treating it like a personal bank account." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Margaret had indeed seen everything over the years: the excessive executive bonuses while workers were laid off, the corners cut on safety to boost quarterly profits, the environmental violations swept under the rug. She had watched the Blackwood family treat the company founded by Harrison's grandfather as their personal piggy bank, never considering the thousands of employees who depended on it for their livelihoods. As Margaret gathered her purse and prepared to leave, she could feel the weight of their stares. Tomorrow, everything would change. The cleaning lady they had dismissed and humiliated for 30 years now controlled their family legacy. But tonight, she needed time to think, to process this incredible turn of events. Walking through the marble lobby for what might be the last time as an invisible presence, Margaret allowed herself a small smile. Harrison Blackwood had given her the ultimate gift. Not just wealth, but the power to prove that everyone deserved respect, regardless of their position in life. The real test was just beginning. Margaret Chen stood in the elevator of the Blackwood Industries building, watching the numbers climb toward the executive floor she had cleaned for 30 years but never occupied. 3 weeks had passed since the will reading, 3 weeks of legal battles, media attention, and constant harassment from the Blackwood family. But today, she would officially take control of the company. The elevator dinged softly as it reached the 50th floor. The doors opened to reveal the executive suite, with its marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Usually, Margaret would have arrived before dawn with her cleaning cart, invisible to the important people who worked here. Today, she wore a simple but elegant navy blue suit, her first business outfit ever, and carried a leather briefcase containing the legal documents that made her the majority shareholder of a Fortune 500 company. The receptionist on the executive floor, a woman named Patricia who had worked there for 15 years, looked up in surprise. Unlike the dismissive treatment Margaret had received at the law office, Patricia's expression was carefully neutral. Word had spread throughout the building about the shocking inheritance, and everyone was curious about what would happen next. "Good morning, Mrs. Chen," Patricia said professionally. "The board is assembled in the main conference room." Margaret nodded her thanks and walked down the hallway she knew by heart. Every office, every corner, every hidden spot where executives thought their private conversations couldn't be overheard. She had been the silent witness to 30 years of corporate decisions, both good and bad. The conference room doors were already open, and Margaret could see the assembled board members through the glass walls. These were powerful men and women who controlled billions of dollars in assets, who made decisions that affected thousands of jobs. She recognized all of them from her years of cleaning around their late-night meetings. As she entered the room, the conversation stopped abruptly. 12 pairs of eyes turned toward her, some curious, some hostile, all calculating. At the head of the table sat Victoria Blackwood, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. Though she was no longer the majority shareholder, she still held her position as chairman of the board, a role she was clearly determined to use against Margaret. "Well," Victoria said, her voice dripping with false politeness, "look who's decided to grace us with her presence. I suppose you think you can just waltz in here and play businesswoman?" Margaret took her seat at the opposite end of the long table, placing her briefcase carefully beside her chair. She had spent the past 3 weeks studying everything she could about corporate governance, financial statements, and business law. But more importantly, she had spent 30 years observing this company from the inside. "I'm here to discuss the future of Blackwood Industries," Margaret said calmly. "As the majority shareholder, I believe it's time for some changes." Board member Richard Steinberg, a man in his 60s who had served on various corporate boards for decades, leaned forward with a condescending smile. "Mrs. Chen, with all due respect, running a major corporation requires years of experience and education. Perhaps you should consider selling your shares to someone more qualified." "More qualified like you?" Margaret asked quietly. "The same board that approved the decision to move manufacturing overseas, eliminating 800 jobs here in the city?" Steinberg's smile faltered. "That was a necessary business decision to remain competitive. Was it necessary to give yourselves bonuses totaling $12 million the same year?" Margaret's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it. "I was there cleaning the conference room when you made that decision. I saw the champagne celebration afterward." An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Margaret opened her briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. "I've had 3 weeks to review the company's financial records, along with my own observations from 30 years of working in this building. Would you like to know what I found?" Victoria's face had gone pale, but she rallied with typical arrogance. "What could you possibly understand about complex business operations? You're a cleaning lady." "I was a cleaning lady," Margaret corrected. "And that position gave me access to information most shareholders never see. For instance, I know about the safety violations at the Newark plant that were covered up rather than fixed. I know about the environmental dumping that was cheaper than proper disposal. I know about the bribes paid to city inspectors, the falsified inspection reports, and the systematic cheating of employee pension funds." The room had gone completely silent. Margaret could see fear creeping into several faces around the table. She opened the folder and began placing documents on the table. "These are copies of memos I collected over the years. Conversations I overheard. Evidence of decisions that put profit over people, repeatedly and deliberately." Board member Janet Morrison, who had always seemed more ethical than her colleagues, spoke up nervously. "Chen, if you're suggesting illegal activity, perhaps we should discuss this with legal counsel present." "Oh, I've already discussed it with legal counsel," Margaret replied. "In fact, I've discussed it with federal prosecutors. They were very interested in what a 30-year employee might have witnessed." Victoria shot to her feet, her careful composure finally cracking. "You're threatening us? This is extortion." "No," Margaret said, her voice still calm. "This is accountability." Harrison knew what was happening in his company. In our conversations, he expressed deep regret about the direction things had taken. He felt he had lost control, that the board was more interested in short-term profits than long-term sustainability. She pulled out another document, this one bearing Harrison's signature. This is a letter Harrison wrote before his death, detailing his concerns about the company's direction and his hopes for reform. He left detailed instructions for me about what needed to change. Margaret stood and walked to the large window overlooking the city. "Do you see that building across the street? That's where I lived for my first 5 years in America, in a single room with my infant daughter. I worked 3 jobs to make ends meet, including cleaning office buildings at night. I know what it's like to struggle, to worry about paying rent and buying groceries." She turned back to face the board. "For 30 years, I've watched this company make decisions that affected thousands of families just like mine. Workers laid off so executives could get bonuses. Benefits cut so shareholders could get dividends. Safety standards ignored so quarterly reports would look better." Richard Steinberg tried to regain control of the conversation. "Chen, business is complex. Sometimes difficult decisions have to be made for the greater good of the company." "Whose greater good?" Margaret asked sharply. "The workers who lost their jobs, or the executives who bought new vacation homes with their bonuses?" She returned to her seat and pulled out one more document. "This is my plan for reforming Blackwood Industries. First, we're going to recall all products from the Newark plant and fix the safety issues properly. Second, we're going to restore the pension contributions that were borrowed from employee funds. Third, we're going to implement real environmental compliance, not just the minimum required by law." Victoria was shaking with rage. "You can't just come in here and destroy everything we've built." "I'm not destroying anything," Margaret replied. "I'm fixing what was broken." Harrison understood that a company's true value isn't just measured in stock prices. It's measured in the lives it affects, the communities it serves, and the legacy it leaves behind. Board member Thomas Wright, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. "These changes you're proposing will cost millions. Shareholders won't stand for it." Margaret smiled for the first time since entering the room. "I am the majority shareholder, Mr. Sova." "Right. And I'm willing to accept lower profits in exchange for doing the right thing." She opened her briefcase once more and withdrew a stack of resignation letters. "I'm prepared to accept the resignation of any board member who can't support this new direction. However, I should mention that anyone who resigns now will be forfeiting certain legal protections regarding past decisions." The threat was clear. Stay and help reform the company, or leave and face potential prosecution for past wrongdoing. Janet Morrison was the first to speak. "What exactly are you proposing?" Margaret had clearly thought this through. "Complete transparency in executive compensation. Environmental compliance that exceeds federal requirements. A worker profit-sharing program. Investment in American manufacturing jobs instead of moving everything overseas." "That's corporate suicide," Steinberg protested. "Is it?" Margaret asked. "Or is it what business should have been doing all along?" Harrison built this company on the principle of treating employees fairly and serving customers honestly. Somewhere along the way, those principles got lost. She stood again, this time with the authority of someone who had found her voice. "I'm not asking for your approval. I'm informing you of the changes that will be implemented. You can be part of the solution, or you can be replaced. You think you can just wave a magic wand and fix everything? You have no idea how complicated this business is." "You're right," Margaret admitted. "There's a lot I don't know about running a corporation, but I know about people. I know about right and wrong. And I know that a company full of talented, motivated employees will outperform a company full of demoralized workers every time." She packed her documents back into her briefcase. "I'm scheduling individual meetings with each board member over the next week. We'll discuss your future with the company and your willingness to support these changes. Those who choose to stay will help build something better. Those who don't will be replaced by people who share Harrison's original vision." As Margaret prepared to leave, Victoria made one last desperate attempt to assert authority. "The shareholders will never accept this. They'll demand your removal." Margaret paused at the door and looked back. "The minority shareholders own 30% of the company combined. I own 70%. Unless they can convince me to vote against myself, I think my position is secure." She left the conference room behind a wave of shocked silence. Walking through the executive suite, Margaret noticed that the employees were watching her with a mixture of curiosity and hope. Word was already spreading through the building about the new majority owner and her plans for change. In the elevator going down, Margaret reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just 3 weeks. She had gone from being invisible to being one of the most powerful people in the city. But more importantly, she now had the opportunity to prove that business success and ethical behavior weren't mutually exclusive. The elevator reached the ground floor, and Margaret walked through the lobby where she had once pushed her cleaning cart. The security guards nodded respectfully, the same guards who had barely acknowledged her existence for 30 years. She stepped out onto the busy street, where reporters were waiting with cameras and questions. "Chen, what are your plans for Blackwood Industries? Will you be making executive changes? How does it feel to go from cleaning lady to corporate owner?" Margaret paused on the steps of the building and looked back at the towering structure that had been such a significant part of her life. Then she looked at the cameras and reporters, and beyond them, to the faces of ordinary people who had stopped to watch the spectacle. "Blackwood Industries is going to remember what it means to be a responsible corporate citizen," she said clearly. "We're going to prove that treating employees fairly and serving customers honestly isn't just good for society, it's good for business." As she walked away from the chaos, Margaret felt a profound sense of purpose. The real work was just beginning, but for the first time in 30 years, she felt truly powerful, not because of the money or the corporate title, but because she finally had the platform to fight for the things she had always believed in. The quiet woman had found her voice, and she intended to use it. 6 months after taking control of Blackwood Industries, Margaret Chen stood before a packed auditorium at the company's annual shareholder meeting. The transformation had been nothing short of extraordinary, though it hadn't come without its battles. As she looked out at the sea of faces, employees, investors, media representatives, and former adversaries, Margaret reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The early months had been brutal. Victoria Blackwood had indeed tried to rally the minority shareholders against Margaret's reforms, painting her as an unqualified outsider who would destroy the company's profitability. 7 board members had resigned rather than support the new direction, forcing Margaret to rebuild the leadership team from scratch. The business media had been largely skeptical, with headlines questioning whether a former cleaning lady could really run a Fortune 500 company. But Margaret had persevered, guided by the principles Harrison had shared with her and the insights she had gained from 30 years of observation. She had promoted several mid-level managers who had impressed her with their integrity and vision. She had hired new board members with backgrounds in sustainable business practices and employee relations. Most importantly, she had kept her promises to the workforce. The Newark plant had been completely renovated, with new safety equipment and environmental controls that exceeded federal requirements. The cost had been substantial, $43 million, but the result was a facility that workers could be proud of, and a community that no longer feared for its health. The pension fund had been fully restored, with interest paid to make up for the years of borrowed contributions. A profit-sharing program had been implemented that gave every employee, from janitors to executives, a stake in the company's success. The financial results had initially been concerning. The first quarter after Margaret took control showed a significant drop in profits due to the costs of reform. The stock price had fallen nearly 30%, and several major investors had sold their shares. Victoria had gleefully pointed to these numbers as proof that Margaret was destroying Harrison's legacy. But by the 4th month, something remarkable had happened. Employee productivity had begun to soar. Customer satisfaction ratings reached all-time highs. The company's reputation for quality and integrity attracted new clients who specifically wanted to work with an ethical corporation. Most surprising of all, the environmental improvements had actually reduced long-term costs by eliminating waste and improving efficiency. Now, 6 months later, Margaret was ready to present the most stunning turnaround in corporate history. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium's sound system. "When I inherited this company 6 months ago, many of you doubted whether someone with my background could successfully lead a major corporation. I understood those doubts. After all, I had spent 30 years cleaning offices, not running them." There was polite laughter from the audience, though Margaret could still sense the skepticism from some quarters. "But I learned something important during those 30 years of observation. I learned that a company's true strength doesn't come from its executives or its shareholders. It comes from every single person who shows up to work each day, believing they can make a difference." She clicked a remote, and the large screen behind her displayed a chart showing the company's performance over the past 6 months. In the first quarter after implementing our reforms, Blackwood Industries posted a profit of 8% below the previous year. Many of you expressed concern about this decline, but I want to show you what happened next. The chart revealed a steady climb in the following months. By month 4, we had not only recovered our losses, but exceeded the previous year's performance. In month 6, we posted our highest quarterly profits in company history, a full 23% above our best previous quarter. The auditorium erupted in surprised murmurs. Even Margaret's supporters hadn't expected such dramatic results so quickly. "How did we achieve this?" Margaret continued. "By remembering that people work harder when they're treated with respect. By understanding that customers prefer to do business with companies they trust. By recognizing that environmental responsibility and financial success aren't mutually exclusive." She clicked to the next slide showing employee satisfaction surveys. Worker satisfaction is up 67%. Productivity is up 41%. Customer retention has improved by 52%. These aren't just numbers. They represent real people who now believe in what they're doing. In the audience, Margaret could see familiar faces from her cleaning days. There was Janet from accounting, who had always been kind to her. There was Bob from security, who used to chat with her during her late-night shifts. And there, in the back row, was her daughter Lisa, now a recent graduate with a business degree, beaming with pride at her mother's transformation. Margaret clicked to another slide showing the company's new initiatives. "We've established the Harrison Blackwood Foundation for Worker Education, providing scholarships and training programs for employees who want to advance their careers. We've opened 3 new manufacturing facilities in communities that had lost jobs to overseas production. We've implemented the most comprehensive employee healthcare plan in our industry." Victoria Blackwood sat in the front row, her face a mask of forced composure. Beside her sat James and Clarissa, both looking uncomfortable as their former inheritance generated unprecedented success under someone they had dismissed as worthless. "But I want to address something more personal," Margaret said, her tone becoming more intimate. 6 months ago in this very building, I was humiliated by people who thought they knew my worth based on my job title. They saw a cleaning lady and assumed I had nothing valuable to contribute. The auditorium fell silent, understanding that this was the heart of Margaret's story. Harrison Blackwood saw something different. He saw someone who had spent decades learning about people, about business, about what really matters in life. He trusted me with his life's work, not despite my background, but because of it. Margaret's voice grew stronger. "Every person in this room has value, regardless of their position or education or bank account. The janitor who keeps our offices clean might have insights that could improve our operations. The security guard who greets people at the door might understand customer relations better than our marketing team. The cafeteria worker who serves lunch might have ideas about efficiency that our management consultants never considered." She clicked to a slide showing a new organizational chart. "That's why we're implementing the most revolutionary change in Blackwood Industries history. We're creating employee advisory councils in every department, giving every worker a voice in how their area operates. We're establishing a direct communication line between the executive team and frontline employees. Most importantly, we're proving that when you treat people with respect, they'll exceed every expectation. The applause that followed was thunderous and sustained. Margaret could see tears in the eyes of many employees who had never imagined their voices would matter to corporate leadership. When the applause died down, Margaret made one final announcement. "I want to share something that Harrison wrote in his final letter to me. He said, 'Margaret, I'm not leaving you this company because I feel sorry for you. I'm leaving it to you because you have the wisdom to use power responsibly. You understand that true wealth comes from lifting others up, not pushing them down.'" She paused, her own eyes misting with emotion. "I hope I've proven worthy of that trust." As the meeting concluded and people began to file out, Margaret was surrounded by well-wishers and reporters. But she noticed Victoria approaching, her expression unreadable. "Margaret," Victoria said quietly, "may I speak with you privately?" They walked to a quiet corner of the lobby, away from the crowds. Victoria's carefully maintained facade finally cracked, revealing something Margaret had never seen before: vulnerability. "I owe you an apology," Victoria said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I spent 6 months trying to destroy you because I couldn't accept that Harrison saw something in you that I never did." Margaret waited, sensing there was more. "I've been thinking about our last conversation, about what he told me before he died," Victoria continued. "He said he was proud of the business he'd built, but ashamed of what it had become. He said he hoped someone would come along who remembered what the company was supposed to stand for." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "I thought he was just getting sentimental in his old age. I never imagined he was planning to entrust everything to someone who would actually restore those values." Margaret felt a surge of compassion for this woman who had lost more than an inheritance. She had lost the chance to understand her husband's true priorities. "It's not too late," Margaret said gently. "Harrison believed people could change, could grow. There's always room for someone who wants to help build something better." Victoria looked surprised. "Are you offering me a position?" "I'm offering you a chance to be part of the legacy Harrison really wanted to leave behind. Not just wealth, but a company that makes a positive difference in the world." As Margaret left the building that evening, she reflected on the complete transformation of her life. 6 months ago, she had been invisible, dismissed, humiliated. Now, she was leading one of the most successful corporate turnarounds in recent memory. But more importantly, she had proven that everyone deserves respect, that wisdom comes from unexpected places, and that power used responsibly can change lives. The quiet woman had become a powerful voice for change, not by abandoning her values, but by staying true to them. She had shown the world that sometimes the person everyone overlooks is exactly the person who can see what needs to be fixed. Walking to her car, no longer the old Honda she had driven for 15 years, but still a modest vehicle by billionaire standards, Margaret smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove that business could be both profitable and principled. But tonight, she was simply a woman who had discovered that her voice, once found, could move mountains. The transformation was complete, but the real work was just beginning. And Margaret Chen, formerly invisible cleaning lady, now corporate leader and champion of the overlooked, was ready for whatever came next.